Great, thanks very much, Bill, and welcome to everybody. And welcome to our weekly CP Tech Center Tuesday lunchtime webinar programs. This one today is the second of two looking at ADA compliance. We're going to have Jackie Spoor and Jonas talk to us on that topic. Again, just a quick refresher that the center is primarily sponsored by the Portland Cement Association, the Iowa DOT, Iowa Concrete Paving Association, and the American Concrete Paving Association, and many of the state chapters that are part of the ACPA network. Much of the information and expertise that we're presenting in the series comes from work or materials gathered from FHWA and from the National Concrete Consortium. Any information that you want about any of these organizations, give us a shout. The center itself is part of Iowa State University, and our primary role is to fit that little niche spot between agency, industry, and academia, that we can take good research, good practice, and get it into the hands of practitioners, both agencies and industry. And our primary goal is to make sure that we're building the best possible concrete pavements nationwide. We produce a lot of materials, a lot of written documents, and sessions like this. So go to our website if you need any information related to concrete pavements. So today is the second of two on ADA. The next series that we're going to be running is on preservation. We're going to have 3 workshops next week, looking at pavement management and preservation. Following week is pavement evaluation and strategy selection. And the third week is preservation, treatment, construction with some field examples. To register for these, go to the ACPA website shown at the bottom of the slide. All right, today we have 2 speakers. Jackie Spoor from Wisconsin is a graduate of UW-Platteville with a degree in civil engineering, focusing on structural engineers, but we managed to fix that, got her engaged in pavements. She's worked her career in consulting on a broad range of activities. She's also actively involved in a whole bunch of leadership positions and education activities. She started with the Wisconsin Concrete Paving Association in 2018. And then following on from last week, Jonas, a graduate from University of Missouri, Rolla, also the degree of civil engineering. He's worked for a couple of DOTs, a consulting firm, and has also been with the ACPA Missouri-Kansas chapter for about 18 months, Jesse. He is also a certified ADA coordinator, which makes him well qualified to be able to speak on today's topic. Our learning objectives, for those who really need them, is Jackie's going to help us to be able to describe how Wisconsin is implementing PROWAG's 11% maximum slope difference between ramp and gutter pan, and to be able to discuss curb ramp staking bid item and how Wisconsin is using this item and how it's working out for them. JC will then pick up and help teach us how to apply innovative methodologies that Missouri has implemented, and help us to discuss how to implement a pay per each curb ramp item into our contracts. All right, I've put this slide as late as I could as part of my ramble. We are encouraging anybody that is listening to send questions. Because it's a very large group, we've got about 400 people online. We can't do one-on-one question and answer, but feel free to type your questions in the question box on the GoToMeeting control system, and we will get answers to those and have those circulated to the whole group. All right, PDH certificates will be emailed out later in the week, except to those people who ask us during the presentation if PDH certificates are going to be sent, because they're obviously not listening to me right now. We will also be posting the presentation and a recording of this webinar on the CP Tech website. You can come and download those at any time. And with that, I believe I am done, and I can hand it over to Jackie to talk about the Wisconsin experience.
All right, let me just switch my screen here. Here we go. All right, everyone, thank you for the introduction, Peter, and the opportunity to share some of our experiences with you today. As Peter noted, my name is Jackie Spoor. I'm a pavement engineer for Wisconsin Concrete Pavement Association. I have worked throughout my career in this industry, majority of the time as a field engineer. So if you guys were on last week's webinar, you had the opportunity to hear from Jonas, and he's going to cap off today's webinar. Again, welcome to the second part of the ADA guidance series. Today I'm going to be presenting on what we've been doing in the Midwestern state of Wisconsin, what some of our interpretation and implementations of the PROWAG guidelines have been, and some examples to go with it. My background is in construction, so I'm going to present with that experience in mind. As noted, we'll be taking questions and responding through email after the presentation so we can be mindful of your time. So we need to start with a little disclaimer. The following presentation is based on how Wisconsin interprets PROWAG, and more importantly, what WisDOT has written into their specifications. Each state has their own DOTs that may interpret and or enforce the guidance differently. So in our case, Wisconsin has some tighter requirements, and I'm going to go over those. My note to you is to take the information presented today. It's kind of like a supermarket approach. When you go through the store, you go up and down the aisles, but you don't necessarily put everything into your cart. Same goes here. Check with your DOT and specifications before you change anything based on this presentation. So millions of people use Wisconsin's transportation infrastructure every day, and WisDOT has strived to ensure accessibility for motorists, cyclists, and pedestrians. WisDOT regularly updates facilities and processes to better serve those with vision, hearing, or mobility impairments. So these updates are made as part of a broader effort to comply with Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. WisDOT's ADA program has done a good job developing policies and guidance to help ensure equal access to programs, activities, services, buildings, and public rights-of-way. When it comes to updated existing or older infrastructure, I think we've seen other public agencies throughout the nation face similar challenges to ensure ADA compliance. WisDOT updates ADA requirements as part of a scheduled construction or maintenance. Some upgrades are managed independently or as standalone projects. More than 45,000 curb ramps throughout the state highway system were recently inventoried to help guide future improvement priorities. All WisDOT roadside facilities are built to current ADA standards at the time of planning and construction. Older facilities received improvement resources in the fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19 budgets. In this is a screenshot of the interactive map, which enables users to zoom in on areas throughout the state highway system that includes sidewalks and curb ramps. The data included helps users differentiate among curb ramp features. Transportation planners also are able to use this information for insight and planning purposes. Sometimes we need to experience things to become relatable. So if you've ever needed to use a wheelchair, crutches, or a cane, then maybe you can feel the pain some facilities can cause a person with limited mobility. Because of this, Wisconsin implemented the 2019 transition plan. Our Secretary of Transportation, Craig Thompson, noted that WisDOT shares a great challenge with many other public entities throughout the United States in modernizing infrastructure that, in some cases, dates back generations. He goes on to say, we have established that ADA projects and compliance website for you to give input on ADA transition plan. So as part of their transition plan, WisDOT implemented the 6-year program where projects need to meet the definition of an alteration per ADA. It's estimated that this will address approximately 6,000 curb ramp locations and be roughly about $15 million for construction costs, which doesn't include acquiring right-of-way. Then there's a standalone program, and that's for projects outside the 6-year program with prioritization criteria such as safety, existing conditions, complaints, pedestrian generations. Title II requires state and local governments to ensure that persons with disabilities have access to the pedestrian routes in the public right-of-way. An important part of this requirement is the obligation, whether streets, roadways, or highways are altered, to provide curb ramps where street-level pedestrian walkways cross curbs. This requirement is intended to ensure that accessibility and usability of the pedestrian walkway for people with disabilities. So removing barriers for travel. One place we don't usually consider a barrier is curb. I put this photo in here purposefully. Oftentimes we don't consider hidden or even temporary disabilities. Have you ever injured yourself working out, or perhaps needed to replace a knee or twisted an ankle? If so, it becomes very apparent of everyday items that can become major obstacles when navigating our world with a disability. So I've thrown out the word altered a few times already, and I want to dive into that a little deeper here. The guidance set forth had varied interpretations, and some questions arose regarding alteration requirements of roadway improvements, and if and when we needed to improve curb ramps. These questions were also largely due to the development of a variety of road surface treatments, such as an asphalt overlay. Wisconsin had a front row view of what the definition of altered really meant. One of our cities had several streets that were in dire need of improvements. In 2015, they rolled out their high impact paving program, which is a program in essence to mill and overlay the entire city. So when they rolled this out, they halted all reconstruction activities, which were predominantly concrete reconstruction projects, and directed all funding to the high impact paving program. So in a nutshell, they overlaid a record number of streets between 2015 and 2019. They thought that if they improved the streets, the public outcry would subside. And in general, I would agree. So what wasn't considered was the ADA compliance. After the first couple of years, a number of groups became vocal, and as you can imagine, it gained attention. I don't know all the specifics of the projects, but I know a lawsuit was involved, and several of the early projects had to go back and improve all the ramps to meet compliance. The alteration of the pavement and not the ramp inevitably altered the slope of and then threw the ramp out of compliance. Since the suit, the design has changed and ramps were included in the alteration of the roadway. This is what's outlined in PROWAG, alterations to existing facilities. The guidance required alterations to existing facilities to comply with the requirements for new construction to the maximum extent feasible. Existing facilities that are not altered, where they do not address existing facilities unless they are included within the scope of an alteration. So altering the profile of the roadway alters the slope going into the ramp and therefore alters the existing facilities. Okay, let's review the guidelines for the pedestrian access route or PAR. A minimum width of 4 feet wide, 4 feet, Wisconsin typically specifies 5 feet. Every 200 feet, there needs to be a space for passing that is 5 foot by 5 foot. We have a maximum of 2% cross slope. Wisconsin uses 1.5%, and here's the reason why. On an urban construction project, one of our members was finishing a sidewalk with a 2% cross slope. The forms were placed right at 2% and checked for accuracy. The challenge arose with the finishing process. Finishing from the low end to the high end resulted in an increase of slope. In this case, the 2% slope that was verified ended up being just slightly over 2%, and when measured after operations were done, and it was deemed out of specification, and was issued a remove and replace order. Because of this example, WISDOT now details out 1.5% cross slope with the maximum of 2%. We've also found that some inspectors who may not have the experience measure a slope of 1.8% and deem it out of spec, which is inaccurate and the reason why we created that buffer. The maximum cross slope is 2% per PROWAG guidance, so the 1.8 would still suffice. All right, let's review some guidance on landings or turning space. As part of the PAR, the maximum slope of landings shall be 2% in all directions, with a minimum size of 4 foot by 4 foot as shown in this photo. This picture shows a good example of a properly installed curb ramp that meets all ADA standards. Landing at the top with a less than 2% slope in any direction, detectable warning fields installed properly, 1.5% max cross slope at intersecting sidewalks, which is the WSDOT standard. This curb ramp also has a landing at the bottom of the ramp as well. This shows a nice drawing of a sidewalk and curb ramp elements. The curb ramp slope is shown at 6.25%, which is target, and 8.33% maximum. The note of special shaping right here, this gray area, is detailed out at 1.5% for Wisconsin with a maximum of 2%. Also notice a gray break is called out between the grade break and the detectable warning fields, this note right here. The blue turning space or landing is shown minimum of 4 foot by 4 foot with a maximum 2% slope in all directions. If the walk is 4 foot wide, then a space of 5 foot by 5 foot is required for passing areas at 200 foot max intervals as shown in this dark gray square here. Any cross slope throughout the sidewalk are again detailed out as 1.5% with a maximum of 2%. I find this is a really handy visual tool to keep with you. All right, I'm not going to cover all of WSDOT standard detail drawings, but I want to touch on a few to show what we have done here in Wisconsin. This is an example of what WSDOT's Type 2 ramp standard detail drawing looks like. As you can see, it closely resembles the schematic we just reviewed a few slides back. A couple of key items to note here. We have a maximum of 10-to-1 flare specified between the detectable warning fields, which is blown up here in the circle. In addition, WSDOT specifies a minimum of 2-inch curb height between the ramps. The detectable warning fields shown here meet the requirements of the 5 foot or less and therefore do not need radial plates, which I'll cover a little bit later. This 5 foot max is what I'm showing right here with my cursor. Here's an example of what WSDOT's Type 2 standard detail drawing ramp profile looks like. As you can see, we have the 1.5% cross slope noted in the sidewalk location. Then WSDOT specifies a 7% max behind the warning fields and a 1.5% at the landing before it meets up with the curb. WSDOT also specifies a 4% gutter pan. This is an area where Wisconsin has tightened up specifications more than the PROWAG guidance, and here's why. The detail shown has been the standard drawing for a while. However, it raised some concern for accessibility. Here we have our gutter pan at 6.25% and our slope at 8.33. It is viewed as a combined slope of 14.55, which is greater than the maximum standard of 11%. Because of the 11% maximum threshold, WSDOT has updated their details to have a standard gutter pan of 4% with a back slope on the ramp at 7%, adding up to the desired 11%. It is believed by making this slight change, the functionality of each ramp will be easier to maneuver and thus not having that foot holder on a wheelchair bottom out at the transition point of the ramp, as depicted in the drawing here. This sharp transition has also posed challenges for trip hazards and abrupt bicycle transitions. Here's an updated version of WSDOT standard detail drawing. Note the 7% maximum. Again, the change was implemented to help with construction tolerances and to better attain the 11% rollover at the gutter. Please note there is no construction tolerances for 8.33, it's the absolute maximum. This is just a shot of the detail for WSDOT's curb and gutter with the 4% cross slope modified from the 6.25. Okay, let's move on to detectable warning fields. Here are some incorrect examples of placed detectable warning fields. The intention of detectable warning fields are to let visually impaired pedestrians know when they are leaving a sidewalk area and entering a roadway. Jesse did a great job last week covering this topic. The ramp orientation itself are used for wayfinding, not the actual domes within the detectable warning fields. A common misconception is that the detectable warning field needs to be aligned in the direction of travel. This is simply not true. Don't try to turn the panel to indicate direction of travel, like the example is shown here. Panels must cover the full width of the ramp, no space between each panel. Here are some correct examples of detectable warning field placements. For WSDOT, they typically specify yellow, but other communities choose to use other colors like white, red, or natural patina or rust colors. The alignment is parallel to the direction of travel, placed at the back of the gutter pan. The directional ramps shown here all fit into the regular detectable warning field criteria, where they maintain 5 foot or less to the back of the gutter pan. Again, the standard detail drawing has been updated with a 5 foot dimension. It's important to have curb ramps laid out in the field before the curb is formed. By doing this, you can achieve proper widths at the pan and adequate slopes per specification. Also note this curb lip here would need to be checked. The lip must have a consistent slope with a max of 1/4 inch. Layout also helps ensure that we're providing appropriate lateral clearance to utility poles, hydrants, streetscape elements, or signing, and exposed bases to remove them from the pedestrian access routes. I know Jesse had a couple really good examples last week for that as well. Everything ties together in the end, so it's important to coordinate all items and to have a really good, successful project. Here's an example of staggered detectable warning fields. Wisconsin no longer allows this staggered pattern as WSDOT has moved to radial plates. Okay, radial detectable warning fields or radial plates. This is the standard detail drawing for WSDOT's radial panels. So when are they required? When the grade break difference is greater than 5 foot from back of curb to the start of detectable warning field. So if you haven't seen them installed before, they can be tricky, but not impossible. As you can see on the outside edges, they are not standard sizes, so they would need to be field cut. It is recommended to avoid cutting through the domes, but if you've ever seen these done, that can be difficult. We've received feedback that this is maybe challenging. It's also recommended that each contractor have the appropriate tools on hand to grind off the sharp edges created by these field cuts. So as you can imagine, having any sort of sharp metal is unacceptable, as it could puncture bike tires, damage bare feet, or etc. So care must be taken to eliminate this. Here's a closer look at the detail. The sliver of concrete between the back of curb to the edge of the radial panel is specified to be more than 3 inches with a variability of up to 1 inch. As a past inspector, this question got brought up a lot, so it's nice to have some clarification on it in our standard detail drawings. Some things to keep in mind. Grade change between the gutter slope and the ramp should be no more than 11%. WSDOT's maximum gutter flange slope is a maximum of 4%. If you were on the webinar last week, Jesse went out in the field and operated a wheelchair. If you saw that, you'll remember that the slope of the curb head opening is a big deal in the ability to maneuver the ramp. A 7% slope max is specified here. In the northern states where temperatures get into the freezing zone, we need to be sure that we have drainage around the curb and away from the curb ramp. As you can imagine, having water and ice at the bottom of the ramp can be very problematic. The flares between the ramps need to be a max of 10 to 1 with a 2-inch minimum curb head. Detectable warning fields need to cross the entire curb ramp and take care when installation of field cut radial plates. Stagger plates are no longer acceptable in Wisconsin. All right, here are a couple examples of 2 curb ramps going around a corner. Again, if you saw Jesse's video, the top left example would be difficult to maneuver, but the lower right would be acceptable. We don't want the abrupt flares in there. Keep in mind that this applies to driveways as well. At driveways, we need to carry the sidewalk through the driveway or lower the sidewalk. So why don't we want the driveway flares in the sidewalk? Because it's part of the path of travel. In my experience, sometimes the small spaces we are given out in the field just straight up don't work. So if that's the case, sometimes we need to go back another panel or take an extra panel out in order to lower that portion of the walk. By doing this, we can achieve the desired requirements of maximum slope. Okay, let's quickly talk about constructing these ramps. In the past, this is what the detailed drawings looked like in Wisconsin, in the upper left-hand corner. If you see the red box, it notes type 1A curb ramp required. And then the names of the ramps aren't important. This is just what we have called them here in Wisconsin. And this is basically all the information that would be provided to field staff or contractors. So as you can imagine, sometimes what our contractors and our inspectors in the field found was that it was difficult or sometimes impossible to fit the ramps in the space provided. Now this photo in the upper right-hand corner is an example of a situation where the designer likely didn't physically go out and see if the type of ramp specified would actually work. Oftentimes when I was in the field on projects, I would assist the contractor to quote unquote make it work in the field. So can we make this curb ramp work in this location? Yes, but can we do it at the same price as a simple type 1A curb ramp? Unlikely. This location would need a lot more design and likely more right-of-way acquisition or a curb in order to make it work. For this layout example, we have simple callouts for the type of curb ramp required. By doing this, we are having most of our contractors and field engineers doing the ADA field design. It also doesn't allow for vertical consideration to be incorporated in roadway design to match field conditions. So where are we going in Wisconsin? At the end of 2017, WSDOT added a curb ramp staking bid item. The intention of this item is to make it simpler for all parties. When this was presented to me, I personally was really excited about it. I will admit we've received a variety of feedback from both WSDOT as well as contractors. Some like it and some don't. This is why it makes sense to me. If the grades work on paper with the amount of acquired right-of-way, then I believe even if the curb is placed higher or lower than planned, then a simple adjustment can be made in the field to make the ramps work. With all this information, the quality of the survey and as-built drawings are imperative. If either of those are inaccurate, then the design and layout will be off and we'll be back in the field scratching our heads like we were before. Here's a layout of our new recommended plan details. The point locations are the hollow circles. In this example, there are 12 points required to be designed by the design engineer. These shots need to correlate with the curb design as well as a survey of existing right-of-way. On another note, this detail shows non-radial plates. As a reminder, the maximum distance allowed before we need to switch to radial plates is 5 feet or less, as shown here. And this note right here where my cursor is. So the traditional detectable warning fields are indeed acceptable in this application. Here's an example of a designed curb ramp. It's giving the grades needed to construct the ramp. It's showing regular detectable warning fields can be utilized and radial plates will not need to be pre-ordered. And we've heard this ordering can take a long time if not planned out properly. It will detect low points and potential water ponding areas and allow time to adjust and avoid them altogether. This detail also shows the direction of drainage. I think it's imperative to understand that when contractors come out to install these ramps, they are given one sheet of paper for the ramp. They do not get the entire plan set. I can understand why this happens. If you have inspected or worked on an ancillary crew, you don't just stay on one job for the entire summer or season. You're hopping from job to job when they're ready for you. Because of that, typically you get your sheets and head out to build your ramp. I think we all need to work together to make the job as smooth as possible, from the survey to the designer to the hands-on contractor. Here's another example of a detailed layout with sufficient information. The XYZ coordinates are very helpful but not essential. Station and offsets will also work. In order to meet the ADA standards and construction tolerances, we need some detailed information like elevation and grades. This will be especially important on alteration projects like resurfacing or preventative maintenance, particularly in urban reconstruct projects. This survey information is equally important to new or reconstruction projects. New construction typically has a depth survey, but some reconstruction projects do not. This is something to be aware of early on when scoping the project and preliminary design work stages. Coordination of the survey needs to be done in early design process, and this includes alteration projects. In this example, a curb is identified and noted. This will aid the contractor when bidding the project. Here's an example of pulling all the details together. It's showing the station offset of the areas that need attention and laying out the direction of flow as well as percentages throughout the drawing. The drawing on the left is even noting the 1.5% slope from the detectable warning field as required guidance from PROWAG, which I'm talking about right here. All right, real quickly, just moving on to push button locations. I know Jesse covered a lot of this last week. I just want to show these pictures show how difficult it can kind of be to access some of the push buttons if not placed correctly. I'll tell a quick little story about my father. He broke his leg on a construction site and had several surgeries to get him back to walking again. And it became very apparent to him, myself, and my family how quickly one will understand on a personal level how important these placements can be. Just moving a walker up a steep slope or a deflection in a curb can be extremely difficult to maneuver if you have a disability, either permanent or temporary. Now, me as a mom, when my kiddos were little, getting the stroller in and out of places was tricky as well. Fortunately, I could lift the stroller up and move it around, but some people simply don't have that luxury. I think Jesse did an excellent job demonstrating this in last week's training. Sometimes we simply just can't make it work, and in these instances, the designer can lower the sidewalk and or possibly add a pedestrian curb. From a monetary standpoint, this option is obviously more expensive. So we have additional material, labor, and time needed to complete this. We hope by requiring the designers to identify these problems with the survey in advance, they will be noted properly in the plans and therefore are bid appropriately by the contractor, saving time in the field as well as all the paperwork that can be involved with potential change orders. I know all change orders can't be avoided, but if we can plan properly, I truly believe some can be. And one less change order I would have to write is good for me. WSDOT updated their preferences for median and pork chop islands. Here's a sloped edge. Here the sloped edge is deemed undesirable and the vertical edge is deemed desirable and now a requirement. We've got some mixed feelings about this one as we do provide trainings to cities and municipalities, and the consensus is they don't like the vertical edge simply due to snow plows hitting them and breaking them during the winter operations. All right, I've included some additional resources if you want to get a more detailed look at what WSDOT's doing with their ADA programming. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and pass it along to Jesse Jonas to wrap up the series on our ADA webinar training.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and thank you to everybody who's on the line with us today. If you joined us last week, you had your chance to boo me off stage and you didn't take it, so I'm back for an encore performance. As you look at this picture right here, this is George Herbert Walker Bush signing the ADA into legislation in 1990. So we've helped a lot of people since then. Something else I'd like to note at this time is, as you saw that presentation of how Wisconsin is constructing and building their ADA facilities in accordance with their rules and the rules in PROWAG. You'll note, as Jackie did, some of the things that they meet or exceed the PROWAG rules on. So just remember, as we present the PROWAG rules, those are minimums, and each state has certainly the right to make different features within that pedestrian access route a more strict compliance standard. So just reiterating that, and Jackie did a fabulous job pointing that out as well. So taking a closer look, we know that we didn't get new money to solve this problem, and we also know that we're sitting on a completion date for our transition plan. So those two things mean that we need to get moving, and probably we need to do a little bit more than we've been, which is a challenge in the system's current needs. Right now we've got roads and bridges with more needs than money, and we know that if we don't do it within our capability and our understanding of the rules, then we're going to have somebody else dictate that for us, as has happened in other places. So it's really important that we take our destiny into our own hands, because what we don't want is we don't want to end up in consent decrees where we have to take all of our resources away from the multimodal system needs and put them all into one. So if we take that initiative now and invest, like Wisconsin is, a % of that budget each year into upgrading the facilities, we can do so over the course of a natural progression of touching our projects in each road. So with that said, we're going to just talk about a Missouri experience today. Now, not everybody in Missouri is doing this. Like Jackie said, you walk down the aisle and you put some things in your cart, but you don't necessarily put everything. This is an example of what we've been doing to flex our innovative minds and come up with ways to increase our ability to put more accessible facilities out there. Now you look at this beautiful intersection right here, and I was a part of the design and layout and scoping of this. But the question begs is, do we do this for every single one? So as we zoom in, we have some real tight right-of-way out there, and everybody on this line knows about intersections where you have subdivision monuments, poles, lights, landscape, some very decorative facilities, buildings. We're dealing in tight spots, and sometimes, yes, this level of survey is required. But as you look at that shading and those percents and everything, that takes a lot of additional survey time. That takes a lot of additional PE time. And as a consultant in a past life, you know, it's hard to scope out your scope and fee for the ADA compliance when we're designing them to the nth degree, because sometimes it just ends up taking so much more time than you ever imagined it could. And I think everybody on the line is probably experiencing that in some way, shape, or form. And then we also end up with some pretty high construction costs if we're ending up building these big, huge, built out. In some versions, we call them Cadillacs. In other versions, they're absolutely necessary for compliance. But look at that last one, owner and contractor risk. So I get asked the question, but didn't we design to the nth degree to take that away? So this is just a experience of mine and a lot of my colleagues around the Missouri area throughout the years, and my background's in construction as well. So we get some really, really good designs and a lot of information, detailed information telling us exactly how to go build it in the field. And when we go out there, remembering that a lot of these ramps require cuts. And as a construction engineer in the past years, I often told people, well, I'll know what my budget is once I'm done digging. Until then, anything's up in the air, because when you're digging, you have no clue what you're going to find. And so true on these ramps, because we're dealing with a lot of different slopes, grade breaks, obstacles that we need to have clear space around, all in this small space. So as we start digging, you know, you see that there's that light standard in there, and there's a signal pole in there. That means there's conduits under there. And as we start digging, quite often in these ramps, with the detailed design, we'd end up running into these obstacles. Sometimes you find underground utilities that you didn't know were there. And did survey pick up absolutely everything? Because absolutely everything is required if we want to make certain we can build this exact ramp exactly as shown out in the field. And what we ended up finding in Missouri was quite often we needed to move something. A utility was in the way and we just had to move the ramp. Once you move these things one little bit, everything changes. So now you need that knowledge in the field on how to build these things to compliance, even if you invested all of that front money into the ramps. So that's why we say sometimes this is required, but if there's another way, if there's a more efficient way, you know, we're all for it. And that's what we kind of explored throughout the last decade, I would say. So you got your 3 different ways you can go about it. You can go super detailed up front and maybe even do a SUE investigation. Then you could be certain that you could build that ramp as detailed. But really what we're going to talk about today is a version of a rough. So now this is a little different than what Wisconsin's doing. So they're into the more detail, and we're going to talk about a version of doing a rough survey, but the parts that make that possible. So these are just things that maybe you find some merit in and you take back and start considering for yourself. And then there's that last one, design build project. So we just had a project recently that was planned for design build for improving ADA corridors in Missouri. It's going to be on hold right now because of the COVID situation, but basically ADA is this ultimate design build challenge. You go out there and see what you got, and then you design something based on what's going to fit in that area. That's why we talked in session 1 about putting these in piece by piece instead of ramp type by ramp type. So we will have a design build project. Our state does allow it. We have legislation allowing design build. And they may throw in 50 corridors and see how many they can get for X number of dollars. I'm not sure what the package is going to look like, but we'll certainly have more to talk about on that in the years to come. So how do you make this work? And believe me, it came with growing pains, tweaking, improving along the way, but about 10, 15 years ago, we sat down with this realization that how can we get this a little bit more affordable and still meet the compliance and not have a Cadillac per se or an overdesign. So we started with this special provision. We decided we needed a good special provision. We needed good, modern, updated standard drawings, which came with the transition plan. And then we needed an understanding of what level of survey is required in the field. So in this curb ramp special provision, you know, this first part says the contractor shall comply with all laws pertaining to the ADA. And in the state of Missouri, most cities and counties are including a checklist into their projects. And that checklist largely has the rules of PROWAG listed in it. So everybody that's building this special provisions telling the contractor to be familiar with that checklist that's included in the contract. And at the end of the job, we're going to accept based on it. So it gives them an idea of what acceptance is going to be based on. And here we give the link to it. And one part we go in, this is out of St. Louis County's special provision. They go in detail a little bit more information on the segmental transition. So we talked about those last week. When you're connecting a compliant built ramp to a non-compliant other part of the pedestrian access route, we need to connect the dots because they don't match up otherwise. And these transitions are how we do it. PROWAG tells us about that. And in here, we give some rough guidance to the contractor about how that will be done, whether you're tying into an asphalt side street or a concrete side street. And certainly if you're rebuilding the entire approach as part of the project, then you don't have a transition because you will table that to compliance and your ramp will meet right in. But we want them to know what the requirements are. You see that slope in number 4 there, transition shall not exceed 1% per foot. And we talked about that last week as well. We also want to note the coordination of construction. It's imperative that the contractors submit to us what their plan for reconstruction is because we have to keep a lane of traffic open for the pedestrians during construction. It needs to be in compliance as well. Then you get to the acceptance of the work, and in the checklist, it's a yes or no. Did you meet the rules? And we specify in that checklist what the rules are. So you've got a special provision telling you what to do. You've got a checklist saying what PROWAG spells out, and we go out into the field, and that's our compliance acceptance method. So what's included in a per each ramp? Well, you got to spell it out, and it may be different for you. For us, you can see that that number B there says per each ramp price shall include all costs associated with removal of existing materials required for new construction, as well as the landings, the flares, return curbs if needed. All of these are if needed because we're opening this up, as you're going to see, to a little bit of contractor ingenuity. So instead of just one mind on paper saying what needs to happen, we've got a lot of them out there, all the way from the contracting team to the design team and the inspection team. And down there in that segmental transition, we do need to cap it at a certain amount, just so that we can get an honest price per ramp. And if we go over that amount, so right now we've got 5-foot distance in any direction from the ramp as included in this per each item. If for some reason we should need to go past that, we put a contingent item price in there, or you could put a fixed item price in there, or you could come up with a lot of different ways you want to address that. Or you could just say that it's all part of the per each, however you'd want to go about it. But we decided to take some risk away and put some fixed numbers in there. So per each curb ramps, what's in it for the agency? This is really important. You're getting a fully compliant ramp because you have made the decision that compliance knowledge needs to be in the field and in the design team. So in the field, you've got contractors through training, through annual projects, and a group that's built thousands and thousands of ramps with a lot of compliance knowledge. So on the fly, we can make a move if there's a conduit in the way, if there's a a pole that wasn't picked up, or an underground gas valve that just would take too much time to relocate. So you've got knowledge out in the field. You've got very sophisticated team looking at this all the way up from design on through building. And then you get the much cheaper design. You'll see how we do that here in a second as we get to the standards. You're going to get grade and restoration control. That basically is saying that you're putting in ours per each, that's included, and that way they won't store excavation off to the side, creating bigger restoration area. They may have a dump truck on site just so that it can be hauled straight away and minimize their footprint. Transitional segments if needed, the detours included. Split and dual ramp. So if you're doing a double intersection, make sure you're counting those as two. Even if they are one big opening that stretches two crosswalks. If you're doing two crosswalks, you have two curb ramps in that area. They may be combined, but put two each because the work there is double. And you got less pay items to track, so your inspectors are going to certainly thank you for that. We used to track 7-inch concrete down by the street, 4-inch concrete up on the ramps, all the different kinds of curbs that might be there, domes by the square foot, restoration. You spend more time tracking and counting and worrying about quantities than sometimes just watching the overall compliance going in. This one per each is creating that flexibility and that openness to just focus on the compliance side of it. And then for the contractors, they get the layout and innovative flexibility. They're going to get paid for the work they do per ramp. And the better they get at this, the lower that price is going to come. So we have seen that in Missouri, and whether it be state or county. The price has come down as they've really begun to understand fully the rules and PROWAG and the allowances and the checklist and how to put these things in piece by piece. If something's not right, they can work really quickly to come up with an alternate solution. And 3-to-1 slopes, so if they don't need curb, they don't put them in, and around here that's about 30 bucks a piece, and less 7-inch concrete, that's a savings. So we're going to go real quick through some standard drawings just to give you the other part of it. If you're going to do per each, you're going to want to have some very current standard drawings that are easy to follow. So what we've done here, these are St. Louis counties, and I'll zoom in on it. So you've got two perpendiculars there, a type A and a type B. One has a green space and one doesn't. These are very common perpendicular ramps we see in the right-of-way. Going into the parallel side, you've got two kinds of parallel ramps. One where two paths come in, one where you're a single path coming in. We call those type C and D. So this is some high-level information. Now we go into the blended transition where you've got a 5% max slope that goes up to a turning space. And if you notice all the notes on the right, they're all the same for each of these. And they note where you're allowed 2% max cross slope, or you're allowed 5% max cross slope. And we discussed that last week where those places exist. And then some other general notes that are specific to county requirements. So now we get into certain types of perpendiculars. So you had a type A, and now we got a configuration. Notice how we call it S perp 1. So S perpendicular 1, it's single ramp, single perpendicular 1. And in this one, you've got domes on the ramp. Reason for that is we're less than 5 feet from the bottom grade break to the street, as Jackie pointed out. The next one, S perp 2, that's where the domes are on the radius. These are going to be on your larger radiuses. So you can kind of start to see, if you got a large radius out there, your designer can walk out in the field and say, we're going to put the domes on the ramp, it's a big radius. Or we're going to put the domes on the radius because it's a big sweeping radius. So they can call right out S perp 2. Or if it's a tight turn, odds are really good we'll get that one in. And then we drop down, you got the green space, and then you got your blended transitions below it. And then we get into dual ramps. Here's where they're clearly dual, where you got a green space in between, could be an island, or you may have flares, as Jackie's picture showed. And in the bottom, you got double parallels, which are quite common. So we know when we've got sidewalk at back of curb, we can almost always fit in a compliant ramp because we're dealing with parallels. And thanks to the 15-foot rule we talked about last week, chasing grade isn't what it used to be. And here we got a couple more. So these are all well vetted. A whole big team got together at the county to discuss this, from traffic engineering to design, construction, to planning, and even shared it with local resources to get their inputs on it. So these are current and modern ramps that for the most part, we can go out into the field and say, generally speaking, this type will work here. And we'll get into that now. So you have your per each JSP, which is necessary to kind of call out what's all inclusive. And then you've got current standard drawings and some kind of a naming convention that works for you so that your design team can walk out there at the preliminary design stage and say, yep, this one's going to fit here. Yep, this one's going to fit there. And like Jackie mentioned, getting out there and walking it is absolutely critical to making this work. So what level of survey is needed? Well, here's where we're at right now. So just to give you an idea, and this has been working very well for about a decade now. As we go through our rehabilitation plans, we just note out where ramps are, and that will take the bidder and the builder to the ramp detail sheets. Notice here on those sheets, we highlight the areas for removal. And these areas are another level of training for our surveyors. When we know we have 5 to 10 foot openings at these locations, if you go 15 foot to either side, you've got your 15-foot rule into account. Most of the time, if you get survey points within all of that range, you're not going to have to remove more than that in construction. And because the engineer or the contractor is allowed ingenuity, quite often they can remove less and make these a little bit more affordable in their bid prices. But notice in that bottom right-hand corner, the team didn't feel comfortable enough just to shade the area, that there was enough obstacles and things in the way that they wanted to give a specific plan for that location. So it's not for everywhere, but if you can get a cheaper upfront design cost, a little bit more predictable scope and fee for the consultants, and ingenuity from your contractors, which will help bring down that price, it certainly can help to getting more ramps brought into compliance each year. If you only got X number of dollars, but now you can do a third more of them, that's probably a good thing. And since we all have transition plans, it's a necessary thing. So super fast to end this, I'm going to go through just a little example of how I look at a site when I go out there as a construction engineer, contractor, designer, to see what I'm going to build. So here's a typical subdivision looking existing street, ramps that need to be upgraded. I go to the inside of each of the sidewalk paths, assuming there's 2, and I put dots onto the pavement like this. So going back, it's the private property side. I protrude that line and I put a dot. What I've done is I've defined my opening. That's where I know my domes are going to go, and notice how the domes go up the curb line 2 feet. That's also going to define where my bottom grade breaks go. Because my domes are on the radius, I need to put my grade break behind them. All that area becomes my turning space. So now I've got a compliant turning space, domes, and 2 foot in the direction I'll travel. And from there, at most, it's going to be 15 foot back up the ramp and 15 foot the other way. You can teach your survey crews this really quickly, and they can go get you information really fast for removal limits, should you ever want to do this per each. It just gives them an idea of where to go and how much information is needed. And you'll be able to get ramps in there then during construction. Notice those curbs are in there, the green curbs. Those are if needed. They're not necessary. So from there, if my street isn't roughly flat, and flat's 2% or 5%, depending on where you're at, I need to put in a transitional segment. And again, if necessary. When I'm doing slab replacements, it's going to probably look like this. I'll take out that slab. And with that, we thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoyed the series. I'm sure it sparked a lot of questions, and ADA always does. So don't be afraid to ask those. We're not shy in answering and pointing where we get our information or why we do it the way we do it. But we thank you very much for your time, and I'm going to turn it back over to Peter.